welcome back to Brewbound's continuing coverage of how the beer industry is adjusting to the impact of the novel coronavirus disease, COVID-19. My name is Justin Kendall, and I am the editor of Brewbound, and I'm still in my studio apartment here in Watertown, Massachusetts. But joining me today via Zoom is Brian B.K. Krueger, Vice President of Business Development and Portfolio Strategy for Bump Williams Consulting. Brian, how are you doing?
Doing great, Justin. Thanks for having me, and hope everybody else out there is staying safe, keeping the appropriate social distance, and being leaders in their homes and in their communities. Thanks for having me.
I think we've got the appropriate social distance right now.
I think so.
Fort Collins to Watertown, Massachusetts. So
that's good social distance for sure.
So I asked you to join me today because I want to get a look at the numbers that we've seen come in this week from Nielsen and IRI. Bump Williams Consulting has been sending a breakdown of these, and you're the guy that knows all about this. So this was supposed to be a big slowdown week from the big gains in the off-premise retailers that we've seen recently. Did that hold true? Is this sort of what we're going to see in the coming weeks, a deceleration?
I think you're going to see a little bit of a deceleration, but it's going to get into a few more patterns where you're going to see some pulsing in and out, probably on a bi-weekly standpoint. A slowdown doesn't mean that we've stopped growing, though. Just like you've seen F&B, food and beverage overall has slowed down. For the first time, beer, wine, and spirits has actually surpassed what food and beverage has been growing at over the last 4 weeks. So that 1 week total was a good week for beer and wine and spirits overall, but you did see a little bit of a slowdown as far as food and beverage. So a little bit less pantry stock, a little bit less on the pantry panicking, and there's only so much dry goods and 15 and 24 packs of beers that you can have without starting to go through it. But we are starting to see an adjustment. Yeah, that is correct.
So any big surprises in these numbers that really jumped out at you?
A few. I think the big surprise is that you're starting to see people kind of settle into some patterns, and that bulked up where everybody was pantry loading happened pretty early. The other surprise in there, no surprise actually, is you're starting to see a change in the consumer pattern at home. The frequency that people are going to retail outlets, how they are choosing to get their groceries, how they're choosing to share their beverages and socially distanced occasions online. No surprise that things were slowing down, especially if you look at the state of the economy and the uncertainty that's out there. But you are starting to see some adjustments take place.
So this is going to be an ebb and flow situation, as we've seen that initial stock up, and then it's going to die down a little bit, but go back up as I replenish my pantry, as we all have to stay at home in the coming weeks.
I think a little bit of ebb and flow and a little bit of regionality to it as well. When you see states that have been a little bit ahead of the curve as far as ensuring that people were staying at home or shelter in place or quarantining, whatever you want to call it, that hasn't been consistent across the country. So you see the areas that put that into place earlier, as far as New York City or San Francisco, they're a little bit further ahead as far as what their cycles are. And keep in mind, we are still only on a 4-week cycle. So the analysis, there's nothing normal just with a 4-week sample, but you can start to project a little bit into the future off of that.
Well, what would we compare this situation to? Is there anything that we've seen in recent years that we could even, peg this on as, a similar situation?
In recent years, no, but I think if you kind of look towards the financial crisis of 2008, that's probably as close as we have in a recent time context of history. Looking back, you'd have to look at major worldwide events, and you're talking World War II and events like that, Great Depression, Great Recession. But anything recently beyond 2008, really difficult to have any comparisons to.
I hate to frame this in terms of winners and losers, because this is such an awful situation. But we've seen a lot of brands rally in recent weeks because of this. And so I was going to ask you, who has jumped out as gaining steam in this challenging time?
I think you can make some overall classifications as far as who the winners have been. And for us, what we've seen is it's been a return back to the trusted and the familiar brands. The age of experimenting has definitely declined a little bit. People are going back and making decisions on brands that they trust, brands that they're familiar with. So you do go back to the Sam Adams of the world, the New Belgiums of the world, the Deschutes of the world, even the Bud Lights, the Miller Lights, the Coors Lights. All of those have been trusted and familiar brands. And I think we oftentimes talk about that just being a trust between those brands and consumers. But if you look at the entire three-tier system, there's trust baked in each and every element of that. So who is it that the retailers trust as far as their distributors and the suppliers? There's that relationship that comes into play as well. Who do consumers definitely trust as far as breweries? Who do the distributors trust as retailers? So I think that's what you're seeing as far as the trusted and the familiar brands, and even individual brands within those brand families are the ones that you're seeing come out ahead because they've been the most consistent over the last 25, 30, 40 years and have been providing the service and have always been in front of the consumer and have that relationship with them. So I think that's who you're seeing as far as coming out on the top during this.
I realize this is early times in this situation, and I guess we're only going off about 4 weeks. But do you see a chance that some of these trends are going to hold up long term? Are we going to see these tried and true brands sort of maintain, or will we go back to the consumer seeking that variety that we've become accustomed to in recent years?
I think you are going to see consumers come back to a little bit of variety, but what may change are the vehicles that they're able to get that variety in. If you look at recent history within craft beer especially, variety has come on the shelf. It's also come through the community by the sheer number of craft brewers that have come in there. But I do think that you are going to see some of these trusted and familiar brands continue to maintain a foothold and have another second surge, use this as a way to launch and extend that relationship that they have with the comfortable consumer right now.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things we did start to see this week, though, or the last week period, and is that it was ending March 28th. Does that sound right?
Latest one we ran was through March 29th, that single week period.
29th. So one of the trends that we started to see was a reversal for some brands. So what did that sort of indicate for you?
I think you can look at a couple of brands in there, and it's easy to point those out because it was a first week within this that they've actually been down, when the reality is they've had a long history. And whether that's if you're a fat tire and you've diversified your portfolio and you're up 100% with Voodoo Ranger, but down 2, you're still keeping customers in there. The other one I believe that you're referring to is Leinenkugel's. I think Leinenkugel's, especially on the Shandy, has not been able to benefit during their usual time where people are getting outside and consumption is increasing and there's more social gatherings. I think you're seeing a little bit of that as far as those particular brands.
That is definitely one of those summertime beers. So you kind of wonder how that's going to be affected when we're all sitting on our couches or concrete slab out back or whatever it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. Staying at home is not the most social thing. And a lot of those beers that have those social cues are some of the ones that you're starting to see have a little bit of a blip. But again, it's 1 week. If you look at the overall year to date, they've been able to turn some numbers around. And again, I think they're doing a good job as far as building up their entire brand family.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other things that we're continuing to see is a surge of hard seltzer. I think 8 of the top 15 growth brands were hard seltzer brands. 2 of those were newer entries this year, Bud Light and Corona's hard seltzers. Do we have an idea of where they're sort of sourcing that volume?
They're sourcing volume through the hard seltzer, sourcing volume from everybody. I think looking at the data, if you see the segments that are down or not performing as well over the last couple of weeks, and you're looking at premium and sub-premium, but when you're in a hard seltzer category, and we take a look at kind of a custom universe of this, that's up anywhere close to 200% year to date, and they were the story of the year last year. They had an emergence at the end of 18. They're continuing to source consumers from all across beer, a little bit of wine and spirits, and across the board. So they're going to be able to get consumers. When you have the name behind it, like you do with a Bud Light Seltzer or a Corona, you know that there's certain brand affinities already in place. So they are going to garner some of that existing consumer base and translate that into the hottest category that's been around, especially over the last 18 to 24 months.
And let's be clear, White Claw and Truly are still dominating that category. And I believe each of them had three of the top 15 growth brands this period, right?
That is correct. Yeah, with White Claw being at the top. And there's no shortage of consumers going out, repurchasing White Claw, or even still coming into that category. And that definitely contributes to the White Claw and the Truly growth alike. And like you mentioned, they are the ones that are leading this category, but there's enough category around for other people to play in there as well. And that's why you're seeing so many of them show up in the top growth families for this week, and especially over the last 4 weeks and even year to date.
One of the things we talked about was an ebb and flow that we'll likely see in the coming weeks. What else should we sort of watch out for coming up?
I think, again, getting back to that consumer and consumers settling into a different type of a pattern, whereas they used to go out to on-premise or to their local tap room, that pattern is going to continue to change, and they're going to fall into different cycles. How often do you go to the grocery store now versus how often did you go before? What is your consumption pattern like at home now that you may have a couple of kids working on school from the house and your wife and you are sharing a home office? So I think you're going to start to see some new patterns establish on that. And I think what's going to overall impact it is people are just now starting to take quarantine and stay at home a lot more seriously. So not as many social occasions to venture out to restock the pantry, but they may be supplementing that instead of a wine night that they were having with their friends, or a beer after work at a local tavern or at a local tap room. They're going to start to find more creative ways to do that online. And I don't think that overall home consumption has come down. In fact, we have some data that shows exactly the opposite. The people are consuming just as much, if not more, at home as they were as a total. They're just trying to adjust to this modern world, or the state that we're in right now, and figure out their lifestyle. And it will start to go into patterns like we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I find my own consumption patterns doing that same thing. I'm trying, or even my purchasing behavior. I'm cutting back on the number of trips to the store. I'm using all the e-commerce avenues that are open to me, whether it's a Drizzly or it's an Instacart or a Shipt or whatever. I'm trying to avoid going out as much as possible. So I guess as far as e-commerce has gone, what are the major trends that we have seen so far in those with regard to alcohol?
With regards to alcohol, I think what you're seeing mirrors what you're actually seeing in the store, and that's larger pack sizes continue to grow. If you look 24 packs, 30 packs, again, those were number 2 and number 3 in the last week as far as top growth packages. But you're also seeing that value per ounce. So that can, as far as a 12 pack opportunity, continues to be not only the number 1 beer package, but also the top growth package within that. Another interesting thing is you're starting to see bottles of 12 packs come back a little bit more into fashion. Anything that's offered in a 12 pack, whether it be bottle or can, is still seeing a little bit of growth in there.
What else should we keep our eye out for in the coming weeks that maybe we haven't discussed?
That's a great question. I wish that we had that crystal ball and could project into the future. And again, I think you're going to start to see things cycle down a little bit. I think you're going to see us be a little, just as we were at the beginning with the pantry loading, not to that extent, but there's going to be reactions to the news that are coming out there, to the stimulus package, to the growth packages that are out there, as it starts to impact, especially the on-premise and the millions and millions of people in that segment that are out of work. I think you're going to see a little bit more reactions to that we can't exactly forecast right now, but we have a good feel for. When you change somebody's world, you see how the shopping practices can change.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the insight, BK. I really do. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And again, be safe out there.